Idiocracy is a 2005 cult film by Mike Judge. It's about Joe, a perfectly average man played by Luke Wilson, who gets sent to a dystopian future America where everyone has become stupid. Society is on the verge of collapse, corporations have taken over, and the government, run by a former wrestler, is trying to fix a crop shortage caused by using the energy drink Brondo for irrigation. Joe wanders through the society, gets arrested, tried, and thrown in prison, takes an IQ test, escapes, comes to the attention of the president because of that IQ test, becomes Secretary of the Interior, solves the irrigation crisis, gets punished with a battle to the death for tanking Brondo's stock price, then gets saved and vindicated, and eventually becomes president himself. Idiocracy is this film, but it's also a convenient shorthand, like 1984, brought up whenever people do something stupid, like elect a conman reality TV host as president who politicizes mask wearing during a pandemic. Inevitably, you'll hear people talk about how Idiocracy was a documentary and an underappreciated gem that explains how we got here. And they're wrong. This movie is bad and has almost nothing of value to say. If you start reading up on this movie, you'll quickly start seeing backlash about how it's pro-eugenics, and if you like it, you're basically Hitler. Most of this criticism is pretty overblown, but it does have a point. The opening narration talks about how natural selection used to support the best traits of humanity, but now that's stopped happening and only the worst people have kids. It illustrates this with a case study.
We're just waiting for the right time.
I got too many damn kids!
And posits that the trend eventually leads to a collapse in human intelligence and society totally falling apart. This introduction is terrible. Just to hit the high points, it's not true. IQ is not falling, it's rising. The movie doesn't give any reason why natural selection stopped working, and any attempt to fill in an answer gets dark fast. Like, it's bad that women have reproductive freedom, and careers and teen pregnancy rates are dropping, and incomes are going up. Is the solution to go back to the good old 1800s? And there's no getting around the framing and coding here. It's probably not an accident that the desirable parents are upper-class wasps and the bad parents are framed as trailer trash. Mike Judge has walked this back in interviews, talking about how it's trying to show nurture as well as nature, but just have the rich family discuss adoption or show both families as well-off suburbanites. Also, maybe this is just me, but it all feels a bit incel-y? The nice couple seems to be living a good life, and completely on the same page with respect to kids, but he still gets henpecked and emasculated on camera.
It's always me, right?
Well, it's not my sperm count.
And boy, do those shallow women just love the dumb jocks, am I right, guys? There's a weird self-loathing to the whole thing. But look, whatever. This has been beaten to death. The premise is dumb. The premise of The Matrix is also dumb, but we've all decided to ignore it and like the movie anyway, because the premise is not the point. Pointing out the implied eugenics is as far as criticism of this movie tends to go, and it's just as played out as saying that humans wouldn't make good batteries. When people say Idiocracy was a documentary, they don't mean genetic stocks have gotten worse. So let's just say this was Mike Judge being thoughtless, and the backstory doesn't really work, and move on to the rest of the film. What does this dystopia have to say? Let's talk about homophobia. This is probably the film's strongest theme, and I don't think that was intentional. Almost everyone casually uses homophobic slurs, and a running theme is that Joe's voice and mannerisms are seen as effeminate and gay.
I don't talk like that. I don't talk like that.
Early on, this prevents him from getting help on the street. Then, once he's arrested, he makes an impassioned plea to the court, but the jury doesn't take him seriously because he sounds gay. Later, he's put on death row and given a tiny dick car to fight against big dick cars. He wins the battle by opting out and letting the symbolism destroy itself, then makes another impassioned plea to remind people he's trying to save them. The crowd is on his side, but turn against him when his opponent suggests he's gay. Joe suffers a lot as a direct result of homophobia, and since he's the only hope of saving society, this prejudice is literally dooming the world. And Joe isn't even gay. So at the end of the movie, when Joe becomes president, you'd expect he would condemn homophobia, or denounce toxic masculinity, advocate for more acceptance, and tell people not to judge others based on how they talk, which is definitely a message this film cares about.
But the English language had deteriorated into a hybrid of hillbilly, valley girl, inner city slang, and various crumbs.
But instead, his big inspirational message is...
And there was a time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags.
I wouldn't last a minute in the future with my lisp. The future is also incredibly sexist. These characters treat women as nothing but sex objects with no actual agency, even when they're in the highest levels of government.
Funbags over there is the Attorney General.
There's nothing inherently wrong with showing society as sexist, but you'd expect the movie to push back on that in some way. It could do this by showing its female characters being more competent than people give them credit for. So let's talk about Rita. Even though every description of this movie, down to the cover, describes it as being about an average man going to the future, it's actually about two average people going to the future. The opening sets up an army experiment where they choose Joe and Rita as average representatives of humanity. The average man is an army librarian, and the average woman is a prostitute, which means both of the main female characters in this movie have effectively the same job. But sex work is not a sign of low intelligence. Arguably, this is somewhat progressive if they aren't stigmatizing her. Joe figures out that he's in the future almost right away, while Rita hasn't figured it out after 3 days.
It's been 500 years?
She also has a recurring joke where she doesn't seem to realize her pimp can't come after her.
Oh, hell no. Upgrade is gonna kill me. He gets me when I'm a day late with his money.
But Joe's also slow on the uptake. He never realizes she's a prostitute in a ridiculously tedious running joke.
Think about couples counseling, okay? And you should also think about maybe finding an art manager who's not also your boyfriend.
Anyway, at the end, Rita has to come and save Joe, which finally gives her a chance to prove herself. Maybe she could figure out a clever way to convince people, like leaving the city to find plants that aren't irrigated and show how rainwater helps them more than Brando does. Or maybe she could give the impassioned speech for Joe after the crowd turns on him for sounding gay. She could manipulate the crowd by using their biases against them. But instead...
Shit. Frida, come here, look. He was right. The water, it worked.
And that's when you realize this is more than Mike Judge being careless, and you're not reading too much into things. The direct text of this film is that the average man can solve all of society's problems in a week, and the average woman is shocked that water's good for plants. If the US has been steadily losing intelligence, then surely a good solution would be to invite smart people from countries with higher birth rates. And the obvious way around this is that the dumb people of the future are racist and don't want them here. But for as much as the film's characters badmouth women and homosexuals and people with mental disabilities, nobody ever mentions race. This is sometimes used as part of a hot take that our actual world is so bad, even Idiocracy was optimistic.
There's a whole quadrant of hateful stupid that's completely absent from Idiocracy. In fact, there's a black president in the movie, and it's never once mentioned.
But it's not like racism is a shocking new trend this movie couldn't have possibly foreseen. Ignoring race in a movie about American self-destruction is not optimistic or progressive.
Inner city slang.
It just makes any commentary irrelevant and comes off as comically naive. It's not even shocking or insightful to say that wrestler-turned-president Dwayne Camacho is a better person and a better president than Trump. He recognizes his limits, puts Joe in charge,
he's got a higher IQ than any man alive,
and generally does better at his job than anyone else in the film. This is not a shocking hot take about how bad Trump is. It's a sign that the film is worried about the wrong things. Ted Cruz is a Harvard law graduate. Ben Carson is a brain surgeon. The problem with American politics is not that we're electing people with the wrong credentials. This movie doesn't even make the case that a doctor or lawyer would be a better choice.
It says on your chart that you're fucked up.
Okay, number one, Your Honor. Just look at him.
Nobody even mentions they voted for Camacho for any reason except that he's smart.
Yeah, dumbass, you're even smarter than President Camacho.
They later elect Joe, even though they all think he's a soy boy or whatever. So the fact that the president's a wrestler doesn't even read as criticism. There's nothing about political parties or partisanship. Nobody denies the crop shortage or blames it on the Chinese or thinks Camacho is using it as an excuse to gain power. So what's the problem here? People in government are dumb.
Looks like those clowns in Congress did it again. What a bunch of clowns.
The film does get some good digs on capitalism.
I'm the Secretary of State. Brought to you by Carl's Jr.
It's not particularly deep or incisive, and it's almost adorable that the main concern is big box retail. But on the whole, the capitalist critique is the strongest part of this movie. And it leads to the funniest line.
Welcome to Costco. I love you.
The movie also parodies how popular entertainment is getting dumbed down, which is fine. I have a hard time caring about this because none of this is even remotely new. Andy Warhol made fun of pop culture 50 years ago with a movie of an ass. The opening uses Beethoven to represent how things used to be good, but the Ninth Symphony is less than 5 years removed from Jump Jim Crow. Shakespeare's audience also watched bears get mauled by dogs. Arguing that pop culture is getting worse for real this time just comes across as old man yells at cloud. And it's hypocritical. This guy is dumb because he's watching Ow My Balls, but the film is also expecting you to laugh at that show, which honestly has a Looney Tunes level of anarchic glee and is one of the best parts of the film. But I guess it's fine when we do it because we're ironically detached or something, or it's bad that we enjoy the joke in the film. It also takes shots at how language changes and how speech is getting more profane, which is also not a new criticism in any way.
Good authors too, who once knew better words, now only use four-letter words writing prose.
The movie's heart isn't in this either. Even the non-diegetic narrator throws out slurs.
Justice was not only blind, but had become rather retarded as well.
This doesn't even make sense. The joke is blind and dumb. What are you doing? The narration is a mess in general, and it's only there to make up for how completely incoherent the plot is. Early on, Joe wakes up in the future and visits a hospital. The doctor asks Joe to scan his barcode to pay, then panics and calls the police. Joe escapes, then goes to a movie. Later that night, he gets hungry and goes to a vending machine, where this woman is deemed an unfit mother.
Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase. You are an unfit mother.
And the police come to arrest her.
Particular individual, the unfit mother.
Me? No.
Okay, this particular individual is unscannable.
The police are not looking for Joe. They just discover that he's unscannable right here, and they arrest him for not having a barcode. But then the narration tells us
Joe was arrested for not paying his hospital bill.
Which makes no sense given what we just saw. When it's not rewriting what happened 5 minutes ago or throwing out pointless slurs, the narration is over-explaining a plot that really is not difficult to grasp.
But when the Brondo stock suddenly dropped to zero, leaving half the population unemployed, dumb, angry mobs took to the streets.
Shit, half the country works for Brondo.
Not anymore! And the stock has dropped to zero, and the computer did that auto layoff thing to everybody. We're all unemployed!
But the beloved electrolytes were salts that had been building up in the topsoil over the decades, killing plants and leading to the Dust Bowl.
If your movie is about people being too dumb to know what electrolytes are, it maybe sends the wrong message when you stop to explain your own joke. Joe goes on trial and ends up in prison, where he's forced to get the barcode tattooed on his wrist. If you don't know what this means, there's a conspiracy theory about barcodes being the mark of the beast. This is imagery that suggests society is being run by the Antichrist, and paints the government as satanic and evil and beyond redemption.
They say their new computer is the way to control, but what they didn't say is that it costs your soul.
Wait, if Joe can't pay for things without the barcode, how did he buy a ticket to the film? Okay, that obviously doesn't actually matter, but why was the lighthearted ass joke put here of all places? Oh, and later we see there is paper money. Joe gets the tattoo, takes the IQ test, and escapes. The police track him down and destroy his car. Later, they catch him at Costco and reveal they don't want to send him to jail, but to the president, because his IQ is the highest they've ever seen. Wait, if they want to take him to the president unharmed, why did they destroy his car? Writing a story must be so easy when everyone's dumb and no one's actions have to make any sense. Anyway, you'd expect Joe would meet effectively the Antichrist right now. Maybe Joe has to fight against the government. Nope. The film never connects the dots between the administration and the dystopia. Joe gets to work as a government bureaucrat directly under President Camacho, and that's never criticized or framed as something bad. When Joe becomes president, he doesn't talk reform or revolution or anything of the sort. He just talks about how
reading wasn't just for...
Yeah, never mind. So why did the film lay all the groundwork for this horrible dystopia if it's going to end on a high note without ever addressing it? None of these ideas come together into anything sensible. And it's not because the movie chooses thematic consistency over narrative consistency. The movie does attempt to have a thematic through-line, and despite the opening, it's not about birth rates, it's about apathy.
Every time Metzler says lead, follow, or get out of the way, I get out of the way. Now, you either lead, follow, or get out of the way, all right?
I don't know how to be secretary of anything. I mean, I've never even voted, actually.
Whatever happened to all that lead, follow, get out of the way shit, huh?
But this also doesn't cohere with the rest of the film. Joe doesn't have to learn to apply himself. He doesn't spend weeks in the library learning about civics and crop cycles. He already knows how to fix things. He does it effortlessly by telling everyone else to water crops. The film is anti-apathy, but everybody riots. They demand action when they lose their job, and the whole crowd correctly maps their economic condition to a specific policy and the exact cabinet member who made it happen. The main character, who is from the future, Frito, isn't apathetic at all. He got a law degree and works as a public defender.
I went to law school here.
Sure, he loses the one case we see, but his client is actually guilty and decides to give a sovereign citizen level monologue about laws he knows nothing about. Clarence Darrow couldn't have gotten this guy off. But it doesn't matter. Even at the end of the film, he's a symbol of everything wrong, because he's not smart. And Joe just shows up and makes everything right in an instant because he is smart. And he's not smart because he applies himself or studies or practices or works. He's smart because he is. Maybe the implication is that smart people need to lead because otherwise dumb people will take initiative, but in the present, Joe was perfectly average. Half of everyone he met was smarter than him, and the movie still criticized him for getting out of the way instead of leading.
Yeah, when he says that, you're not supposed to choose get out of the way. It's supposed to embarrass you into leading.
So what is the theme? The theme is people are dumb. That's it. That's all the movie has to say. It is bad that people are dumb. Imagine if Mike Judge worried more about policies instead of genetics. The way to fix society was to help kids grow up in better environments by improving sex education and access to contraceptives.
Thought you was on the pill or some shit.
Hell no.
Making childcare more accessible so couples could afford to have kids.
There's no way we could have a child now. Not with the market the way it is, no.
Decreasing barriers for stable gay couples to adopt. Not throwing people in prison because they couldn't buy food. And Joe's regret is that he never learned about these problems or supported the politicians who would bring about solutions. He watched South Park and decided it didn't matter since both sides are dumb, so why engage? And his arc is learning to engage with politics and shedding his biases to bring about actual change. If nothing else, Mike Judge would probably get fewer people calling him a eugenicist on Twitter. If you still want to watch and enjoy this movie, by all means, do it. There are at least two paths you can take. One is acknowledge these problems, but act like the problems are intentional. Rita's denseness isn't because the film is sexist. It's that the army is so sexist. They think a random person who doesn't know how plants work is an average woman. The joke is on them, not on her. The fact that Joe is blind to his own homophobia is a satire on the ways we mindlessly perpetuate oppression. The fact that he has no plan to stop the dystopia, except reading books, is a satire on the type of liberalism that thinks putting the right technocrat in charge and fighting the culture war on someone else's terms will magically solve systemic problems. And the barcode stuff, and the awful narration, and the never-ending dick car scene, and the interminable prostitute jokes are a satire on how movies need to be 90 minutes long, and directors without that much material will just pad their films with bullshit. Satirically. And if the person you're talking to doesn't buy it, just start name-dropping Zizek and eventually they'll leave you alone. The other way is to admit this film is not a prescient satire. Its premise makes no sense, its plot is a mess, it has nothing of value to say. And that's fine. Maybe it's not supposed to say anything. Maybe it's an excuse to watch this guy get kicked in the balls and laugh at the giant ass and chuckle at the cars that look like penises. I'm sure half the comments are already saying this, and honestly, I get it. If this is why you like the film, I don't have a problem with it. You can turn off your brain and laugh at Ow My Balls. Unlike Mike Judge, I won't say you're the death knell of civilization for doing it. Just as long as you also fucking vote.